guys, and welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast, a true crime podcast featuring myself, Mandy, and my dear friend, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Mandy. How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah? Because 30 seconds ago, you didn't know which way was up.
I literally forgot the entire intro to our show for a second there.
And people literally will write us and they'll write the little quote, welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast. And you were like, nope, not today. Not today.
It just wasn't rolling. Yeah, it wasn't rolling off the tongue like it usually does. No. In my defense, it has been a busy week, a busy month. I'm so tired, Melissa. I really am. I don't think I've ever been this tired.
Really? Somebody timestamp this because we're going to need to come back to it around Christmas when she says the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this must be my mid-year tired spell. Because I'm just barely hanging on by a thread. But things are okay. How about you?
Yeah, things are good. It's really pretty today. Got to get that weather report in. Hopefully it doesn't rain. My son is psyched for it to rain because he has his own umbrella now. And he's just why isn't it happening?
Oh, so he likes the rain now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was 2 years ago where it was truly the bane of my existence was when it rained. And he was terrified, fully terrified, not a joke, not he's being extreme, the drops of rain were going to kill him. So we're past that, and now we're really enjoying it, which is great because we live in Florida, and every freaking day it rains. So
yes, perfect time to start liking the rain.
It's a win.
All right, so we'll get into the story for this week. Over the years here on the show, we have discussed a lot of different crime cases, and most of them have been resolved. It hasn't really been until recently that we've started to dabble in some of the unsolved cases. And although we know it is important to keep the word out there about cases that aren't resolved, we also know that it can be a little bit frustrating to hear a story that doesn't have a conclusion and no justice for the victim. So that's why some of my favorite stories are about cases that seemed like they might never be solved. But thanks to advancements in technology, we have been able to solve them 20, 30, even 50 plus years later. So this is something I actually hate to admit, but it really does kind of feel like things that happened before the year 2000, in the 1900s. It feels like that was really a lifetime ago now.
Do your kids call it the 1900s? Because mine do, especially my son.
Only when they want to irritate me. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But yeah, it's 2023 now, and a lot of us, I should say, are pretty far removed from anything that happened in the 1960s and 70s, and sometimes, to me, it even feels like that time period wasn't even real. Maybe I'm the only one who has a hard time imagining what life is like, 50 years ago, though.
I will see a celebrity's birthday and then they're 75 and I can't believe they're 75 because I remember having the hots for them in some movie I watched in the 90s. And not that you can't be hot at 75, but it's a little bit different. And then I go back and think they were born in what year? I'm not going to do the math today. What were things like then? Then I'm in this looking at history. I don't know. I go through a lot some days. My brain is too busy sometimes. It's weird.
Times have really changed. Technology has improved. And I don't think there's anybody who would argue that things were completely different today than they were in 1971, which is the year that our story takes place. Although things were certainly different in many ways back then, the concept of having roommates in college was still the same. In the summer of 1971, 24-year-old Rita Curran was living in Burlington, Vermont, where she worked part-time as a maid at the South Burlington Colonial Motor Inn, and she was taking workshops in reading and language arts for graduate school. Rita was relatively new to Burlington. She had been living with her parents in Milton, Vermont, but she decided to relocate herself to Burlington because she believed that she would have a better chance at finding the love of her life and starting a family there, which are things that she was really ready to do. In June of 1971, Rita saw an ad in the paper from two other women in Burlington who were also seeking a roommate to share their apartment, which was located on Brooks Street. The apartment was on the ground floor of a 3-story building on a very quiet residential street near the University of Vermont campus. The other two women, who were named Beverly and Carrie, were only going to be living in the city for the summer so that they could work. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, so Carrie and her boyfriend Paul roomed together in one, and Rita shared a room with Beverly. Although Rita enjoyed living in Burlington, her main focus was really on her career. She had graduated from a Catholic women's college called Trinity College in 1969, and then began working at Milton Elementary School as a second-grade teacher. She was extremely dedicated to her job, and she always wanted to better herself for the position. Even though her full-time work was in Milton, Rita still wanted to take the opportunity to live in Burlington for the summer while taking her graduate school workshops. Unfortunately, the dating scene wasn't quite what she hoped, and she later said that all of the eligible bachelors were taken. Rita was described as being a very quiet person, but she was always kind and always ready to help someone else. Her roommates Carrie and Beverly didn't have a close relationship with her, but like we said, they had really only just met, and Rita was often busy spending time with her friends and family that still were living in Milton. Rita had 2 siblings, a brother and a sister.
On the evening of July 19th, 1971, Rita was at the apartment with Beverly. She had worked a shift at the Colonial Motor Inn earlier that day, and she got off around 3 p.m. and later went to a singing rehearsal for her choir group. When she got home at about 10 p.m., Beverly was home, but Carrie and Paul were out doing other things together. Rita went through her typical nighttime routine, which included putting curlers in her hair before she headed off to bed for the night. At 11:15 p.m., Carrie and Paul called the apartment to see if Beverly and Rita wanted to come down to this local bar called Hideaway Harbor to have a drink with them. Since Rita was already sleeping at this time, Beverly said she'd be coming to the bar by herself, so she left the apartment at around 11:20 p.m. About an hour after Beverly arrived at the bar, Paul said he was actually tired and he wanted to leave, so he and Carrie headed back to the apartment. They left the bar around 12:30, but Beverly stayed for a little while longer. When Carrie and Paul got home, they sat in the living room and they talked for a while, and then Beverly came back home and everyone decided to retire to their bedrooms for the night. Although nothing seemed out of place in the apartment, they did notice the door to Rita and Beverly's room was cracked open about 12 inches. Shortly after Paul and Carrie got to their room, they heard Beverly say with a panicked voice, "Something is wrong with Rita." Paul got up and he went to see what was going on. And when he got to Rita's room, he saw that she was lying on the floor, completely nude, with blood covering her face. And she didn't appear to be breathing. Beverly called the operator and dialed into the medical center emergency room, who then dispatched an ambulance to the apartment. When the first responders arrived, they pronounced Rita dead, and then they called the police. Officers arrived and observed a disturbing scene. The room itself appeared to tell the gruesome story about what happened to Rita. She was found lying on her back with her legs spread open. Her housecoat and her nightgown had both been ripped from her body, leaving buttons scattered on the floor nearby. Her nightgown was laying underneath her shoulders and back, and a piece of the nightgown was found in the doorway to the closet. A white bedsheet, afghan, and a bedspread were all ripped from the bed and entangled around Rita's left leg. Her underwear, which had also been ripped, were found to the left of Rita's body and underneath her leg. Rita's face had been badly beaten and was badly swollen and starting to discolor. But other than her face, there was no visible bruises on the neck, shoulders, chest, or the lower abdomen areas. An autopsy later showed that Rita had been sexually assaulted. She was beaten with fists and manually strangled. The Burlington police told ABC News 10 that Rita was attacked viciously and showed signs of blunt force trauma.
It was clear from other evidence that Rita had put up a fight for her life. The curtain in the window had been completely torn from the curtain rod and was laying on top of a stereo set, and one of the beds had actually been pushed about a foot or more from its original location. The curlers that Rita had in her hair were found all over the floor, and it appeared that they had been ripped out during the struggle. It was noticed that Rita's left hand contained strands of hair, and there was one long strand of hair in her right hand. Hair particles were also found in the vicinity of her head, arms, and upper body. Lastly, police found a cigarette butt laying on the floor below Rita's elbow. It was particularly interesting because the cigarette butt was not crushed or smushed or butted out in any way. It had actually just burned out right there at the scene. The cigarette butt was from a Lark brand cigarette, and the investigators confirmed that Rita didn't smoke, and neither did her roommate Beverly. Her other roommate Carrie and her boyfriend Paul did smoke, but they never smoked Lark brand cigarettes. It was determined that robbery was not a motive after Rita's purse, which included about $20, was left untouched. There was no signs of forced entry. Both the front and back door were actually unlocked, which was totally normal at this time period and for this area. The roommates actually never locked their doors.
Which to me now, I'm like, what?
It sounds,
but it was a different time.
It really was. And I actually remember like a time when we didn't really lock our doors, and I would even have like friends, we would go like from house to house, and like even if the parents weren't home, like I remember like a lot of people didn't really lock their doors. Even like when I was, even when I was growing up, like in like the 80s and 90s, like it wasn't. I feel like even then still it wasn't like as common. Like everyone didn't just lock up every door they have.
Yeah.
Not like they do now. The officers did find a small patch of blood at the back door, which was later determined to be Rita's. But the officers did believe that because they saw that there, that meant the killer had probably fled through the back door. All of the evidence from the crime scene was gathered and kept in a container for decades. After interviewing the roommates, detectives figured out that Rita must have been murdered sometime between 11:20 and 12:30 a.m., which is when Carrie and Paul returned home. That's just a 70-minute window of time, which it really is not a lot of time when you really think about it. Beverly left the apartment and went to meet the other two at the bar, but like she was only home alone in the apartment for just a little bit over an hour.
Wow. At around 7 a.m. the next morning, officers started knocking on doors in the apartment building, hoping to find a lead. They didn't find anyone on the second floor, but they did talk to a man on the third floor, a 31-year-old man named William DeRoos and his 24-year-old wife, who we'll call Melinda. And the two of them had just been married 2 weeks before. Both of them said they didn't hear anything the night before. Melinda said she did get up around 1 a.m., but didn't hear any unusual noises or anything else. The DeRoos were interviewed at least 2 more times, but they maintained that they never heard anything. So police moved on to interviewing Rita's family, friends, and other neighbors. Local men who had previous records of sexual offenses were also questioned. Multiple people started calling in with reports about unsettling things that happened before Rita was killed. There were numerous reports about a nighttime prowler seen in the area where Rita was killed. People said they really never thought to report peeping Toms and other suspicious things until Rita was attacked. My mom told me a story about a peeping Tom that she had when she was younger, and it was like very wild to hear because now you would absolutely call the police if that happened, but she was like, it was just a peeping Tom. Like that's just what it was.
Right.
In the case of the peeping Tom that they did end up getting a call about, there were several young women living in the apartment when they heard someone trying to get in their front door. One of the women ran to the door and went to secure the chain door fastener, and then she opened the door about 4 inches. The man that had been trying to get inside jumped over the porch railing and took off. The same women also said they'd been getting strange phone calls in the recent weeks between 1 and 3 a.m. And they said when they picked up, there was always just silence on the other end until someone hung up. Rita apparently also received strange calls before she was killed. The person that was calling would breathe heavily into the phone when she answered. Another woman reported that on the night of Rita's murder, she answered her apartment door to a man who had a dog with him. The man started asking the woman about a previous tenant of the apartment. At some point, this man lets his dog go into the woman's living room, and then he barges right into her apartment without her permission to get his dog.
Oh my gosh, that is like so terrifying just to even think, because I'm like, that definitely sounds like a tactic, like a ploy to get you distracted. It's kind of like you've heard sometimes about people stopping because they see like a baby carrier or something on the side of the road, but it's really just like a trick to get you to stop, and then you're ambushed or whatever the case may be. But this sounds very much like that, like knocking on someone's door with a dog, which is of course a distraction, and then you just let the dog run into their house. Like that whole thing just gives me so much anxiety even thinking about that situation.
Yeah. And you're probably right that that's exactly what this guy was doing, because when he gets into the apartment, he realizes that there's another man sitting in the living room, so he picks up his dog and he leaves. This woman later tells her landlord about what happened and found out that the person that the man was allegedly looking for had never even lived there. And we still have so much more to get into, and we'll do that after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by Green Pan.
I love cooking at home because it's a fun way to experiment with new recipes and flavors. But there's one thing that always used to bug me, and that's my old set of cookware. You know the kind I'm talking about. The cheap, nonstick pans that claim to be easy to clean, but are actually an absolute nightmare. Every time I tried to cook something, the food would stick to the pan like it was super glued on, and I'd end up scrubbing away for hours trying to get it off, or I'd let it soak until the next day, which meant I had dishes to do before the meal even started. But then I discovered a new set of pans that changed everything. Green pan cookware is so nonstick that you could cook an egg on it without any oil or butter, which is great because eggs are practically the price of gold these days. I definitely don't want to lose any of it to burning in the pan. Now, thanks to Green Pan, I can whip up eggs or a gourmet meal without worrying about the cleanup, and that's a recipe for success in my book.
Back in 2007, the founders of Green Pan had a realization that would make anyone's blood boil faster than a pot of water on the stove. Traditional nonstick pans were coated in plastic that could turn toxic when heated up, which is something I had absolutely no idea about. But instead of them throwing in the towel and ordering takeout every night, they decided to create a new kind of cookware that didn't have any of those forever chemicals just lurking around. Enter Green Pan's ceramic nonstick cookware, the pan that makes cooking a breeze without any harmful toxins. With over 150 patents to their name, these guys are the undisputed champions of creating cookware without harmful toxins.
Honestly, though, you guys know I love all things that are pretty, so when I saw the 10-piece Reserve ceramic nonstick cookware set in julep and gold, I was in love. You know how having a new water bottle makes you want to drink more water? Well, the same thing goes for having beautiful cookware. You just can't wait to use it, and mine gets used all the time.
It's 2023. Are you still cooking with pans made out of plastic? Head to greenpan.us and use promo code MOMS and you'll receive 30% off your entire order plus free shipping on orders over $99. That's right, 30% off. Whether you buy one pan or a whole set, that's 30% off. So head to greenpan.us and make sure you use our promo code MOMS. Hey guys, as you know, I'm someone who loves knowing a little about everything. I love the news, I love entertainment, I love it all. But sometimes I don't have enough time to get all the information, all the little details and the minutia of everyday news because my goodness, it's constantly going. But thanks to the Newsworthy podcast, I can get all I need in little bite-sized pieces. So if the stress of the news is getting you down, but you still want to know what's going on in things like the election, check out the Newsworthy. And in these 10-minute episodes, they're just on the go listening. I can listen to it quickly on a walk, on my way bringing my kids to or from school or one of their activities. When I'm in line at the grocery store, there's never a wrong time to listen to the Newsworthy. But if you feel bogged down by the news and kind of the negativity of it, but you still want to be informed on what's going on, the Newsworthy is the place to do it. Erica at the Newsworthy is an independent journalist, and her team does really all the hard work and research for you. I love that the episodes are so well-rounded, and there will be fun stuff like tech or big stories, but the way Erica gives this, efficient and neutral overview of the news, and in just 10 minutes each weekday, it's perfect. Just search The Newsworthy in your podcast app or go to thenewsworthy.com to start listening. Again, search for the podcast The Newsworthy, 2 words, The Newsworthy, to make staying informed easier and more enjoyable every weekday. It's been a while since I've had a baby of my own, and some days I miss it so much. The baby cuddles and baby smiles, but when it comes to diaper rashes, not so much. I remember the first time my oldest had a diaper rash, I was really devastated. Here's this tiny thing totally dependent on me, and now she's fussy and obviously uncomfortable, and I'm supposed to have the answers. Well, with time and treatment, it went away, but what I really wanted was to avoid it altogether. And now, baby butts rejoice. New Huggies Skin Essentials are here, a brand new dermatologist-approved line of diapers, wipes, and pull-ups training pants, all designed with baby's sensitive skin in mind.
The wipes are thick and have 0 harsh ingredients for a great, gentle clean. Pull-Up Skin Essentials has got your big kid covered too, with a training pant that's ultra soft and breathable to help protect sensitive skin throughout potty training. Whether you're a first-time parent or a seasoned pro, make it easy on yourself and your baby with Huggies. Learn more at Huggies.com. Once again, head to Huggies.com to learn more.
And now back to the episode.
So before the break, we were talking about the story of 24-year-old Rita Curran, who was brutally attacked inside of her apartment while her 3 roommates were out at a bar. The police have been investigating every possibility for who could be responsible for her murder. They've been looking into different men in the area that have already been accused of sex offenses, and they're looking into the idea that maybe there was a prowler in the neighborhood on the night that she was killed. The police investigated the possibility that Rita's death could somehow also be connected to the assaults of several other women in the Burlington area. In the 4 years before Rita's murder, there were 4 other attacks reported on young women. In October 1968, a 21-year-old UVM student was attacked at 4:30 in the morning while she was asleep at her sorority house. She wasn't sexually assaulted, but she was hit several times with a blunt instrument. The attacker entered the house through a cellar door that may have been unlocked, which, as we said, was a pretty normal thing then.
Right.
In October of 1970, a 23-year-old UVT lab technician was attacked with a knife in her apartment just 3 blocks from where Rita lived. A man went through a porch window and then into the woman's bedroom where he slashed her abdomen 3 times and then fled to the porch while the woman screamed. On May 13, 1971, a 20-year-old woman was attacked in a parking lot around 10 p.m. by a man in his early 20s. He stopped the woman and threw her to the ground, and he fled when she started screaming. On July 11, 1971, which was less than 10 days before Rita was killed, another 20-year-old woman was attacked in her apartment at around 4 o'clock in the morning. A man, who she said was about 16 or 17 years old, threatened the woman until she complied with his demands. He sexually assaulted her and then left after about 10 minutes. This woman's apartment, however, was locked. These prowlers and all these attacks on women had actually led to an increase in the sale of protective locks, specifically the chain door fastener that I think a lot of people still have on their doors now. After Rita's murder, the sales on these types of locks actually increased 20 to 25%. Many people started locking their doors and leaving a light on outside of their homes. On July 24th, the county prosecutor, detectives from the Burlington PD, state police officers, the chief medical examiner, and many more officials met for this top-level meeting about Rita's case, where they were to discuss all the evidence and all the information they had up to that point. By that time, more than 100 people had been questioned and 3 polygraphs had been given out. It was reported that the FBI was analyzing evidence they found on or near Rita's body. The police later said that some of the reports on this evidence was encouraging, but some of it turned out to be just the opposite. For example, the blood that they had found near the back door belonging to Rita and not to the killer as they had hoped. Also, on July 24th, a media blackout was demanded by the county prosecutor. He said that unless there were any new facts that were cleared through him and through the Burlington chief of detectives, there would be no further information released about the progress of the investigation in this case. The prosecutor said, quote, "We have developed some new and encouraging leads, but I can't say more than that. The rest of the case will be handled in secrecy for security reasons," end quote.
On July 26th, it was announced that the media blackout would be continued and that they were using new tactics to find Rita's killer and that the daily reporting would interfere with these tactics. They also said that they were concerned for the safety of those who knew Rita. On July 28th, police reported that they were still sifting through dozens of potential leads, but they didn't have anything new. They still had about 100 people to question, and the tips were steadily rolling in. Most of these tips were regarding prowlers either they had seen or heard. But also on July 28th, which was just over a week after Rita's murder, a police informant told detectives that Rita's neighbor, William DeRoos, was capable of committing a violent crime. William was the man police spoke to that lived on the 3rd floor of Rita's apartment building the morning she was found dead. Detectives made a note in their files that they had already spoken to William and that he and his wife were home on the night of the murder. William never became a person of interest or a suspect in the case, but they did have a few other potential suspects. One of their suspects was this guy named Philip, who, according to police files, really inserted himself into this investigation as a potential witness, which led to him becoming a potential suspect. But over time, the case started going cold. The reporting on the case started to slow a lot in August. On August 10th, police said they were still actively investigating the case and still interviewing people who were acquainted with Rita. They said that, quote, all avenues were being checked, no matter how minuscule, end quote. By early September, the media blackout was lifted and the county prosecutor admitted that they really had no positive leads and there were no imminent arrests coming. By mid-September, there was only one detective still working the case and he was reviewing all the statements that had been made by the principal suspects. During the month of September, while the investigation into Rita's death was coming to a standstill, 5 other women in Burlington were the victim of attacks. The first one was a 21-year-old UVM student who woke up to a man on top of her. This man struck her in the head multiple times before she screamed and her roommates came to help. For the second and third incidents, on one day, 2 UVM students were attacked in separate incidents on city streets. One student was grabbed by a man as she walked, and another was assaulted in a karate attack while she walked. The fourth victim was a woman who woke up to a man standing beside her bed. And the fifth was a woman who was abducted by several men as she walked. She ended up being able to crawl out of the car when it stopped at a traffic light.
On April 5th, 1972, police reported that they still had no new leads, but the investigation was still ongoing. At that time, there was still just one detective on the case. Although there was really nothing new to report, they did say that Rita's roommates were not suspected in her murder, and that several of Rita's other friends had also taken lie detector tests. Despite having questioned up to 200 people, they weren't able to glean a whole lot of information. Time continued to pass, and in July of 1973, the prosecutor announced that his office was still getting about 4 to 5 tips a month, and no matter how far-fetched or silly they seemed, the investigators were following up on every single one of them. At this time, it was also announced that there was now a $10,000 reward available. But still, this didn't lead to any breaks in the case. 7 years went by, and Rita's case continued to haunt the town of Burlington. Her case made the residents think that their little town was getting subject to big city crime. As we mentioned earlier, locking your doors was almost unheard of before Rita was killed. They just didn't think or realize that there were dangerous predators out there. One detective said that before Rita's murder, there were no armed robberies in the city, and violent crimes were extremely rare. Her death was really a turning point for this community. By 1980, Burlington only had 3 unsolved murders, and Rita's was one of them. At some point during the 1980s, the possibility that serial killer Ted Bundy was responsible was even considered. And this is actually kind of interesting that there is a little bit of a connection. You can kind of see why they would have suspected that, because the inn where Rita was working part-time was actually right next door to the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. And that happens to be right where Ted Bundy was born. He was actually known to be in the Burlington area during the summer that Rita was killed. Bundy was actually executed in 1989, but investigators did speak to him and they ruled him out as a suspect in Rita's murder. In December of 1994, the state of Vermont announced that they had the lowest murder rate that they had even had since the 1960s. And so because of this, they decided they were going to be able to devote more time to unsolved cases, including Rita's case. But unfortunately, they still weren't able to solve her case, and there were no new updates for the next 20 years.
In 2014, the Burlington Police Department once again looked back on Rita's case, this time sending multiple pieces of evidence to a forensic lab in New York City for testing. Remember that cigarette butt that was found left at the scene back in 1971? Well, back then, they just didn't have the technology to extract DNA from a cigarette butt and test it against potential matches, which is probably why the killer left it behind in the first place. The idea that a cigarette butt would lead back to him was literally a completely foreign concept. It's so wild to me now because if somebody had a cigarette butt now that was found at a crime scene, it's almost entirely like, we can solve this case. I shouldn't say almost entirely, but like it is such a big piece. And back then it was like, okay, well, hopefully one day we can figure this out. Let's put it in the bin, thank goodness, for decades.
Right.
But now in 2014, they were able to detect DNA on the cigarette butt that was confirmed to belong to a man. This DNA was put into the national database, but they didn't immediately find a match, which just meant that whoever killed Rita had never been arrested for a felony before. This DNA was tested against the top 13 potential suspects in Rita's case as well, but they found no match. And just to be safe, they even tested the DNA against Rita's roommate Paul and the EMTs and officers that responded to the scene, and none of them were a match. But the investigation pressed on. In 2016, police announced that they were re-examining the whole case with modern technology and that there were still people of interest and witnesses who were still alive that they wanted to look into. In 2019, Rita's case was officially reopened by the Burlington Police Department. By this time, her murder was the oldest cold case that the department had. So there were a team of detectives that were put on this case, and they went through everything and determined that forensic evidence would really be the best way to solve this case at this point, so many years later. An organization called Season of Justice, which you guys may have heard of. It's one that Ashley Flowers from Crime Junkie actually started a few years ago. They actually gave the Burlington Police Department the money to have the DNA tested in Rita's case. And in the summer of 2022, the DNA profile from the cigarette butt was sent to a very well-known and highly respected genealogy expert named Cece Moore at Parabon Nanolabs. And we still have so much more to get into in this story after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors. Mandy, what has no legs, hundreds of hours of never-before-heard content, and zero ads?
Is it the Moms and Mysteries Patreon?
It is! And Mandy, what kind of things can be found on our Patreon?
Well, besides hundreds of hours of content, you can enjoy video content, monthly bonus episodes that can only be found on Patreon, plus, starting this month, monthly hangouts where we talk about, well, we're not really sure what we're going to be talking about just yet.
We sure aren't sure, Mandy, and that's because we want to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Starting this month on patreon.com/Moms and Mysteries podcast, anyone that joins at the $5 level and up will not only get stickers, a handwritten thank you note, but they'll also get discounts on merch and a link to hang out with the moms every month via the internet because we're not leaving our houses.
I really can't wait. You can find our Patreon by visiting our website at momsandmysteries.com, or you can go directly to Patreon at patreon.com/momsandmysteriespodcast. The link is in the description of this episode if you need it.
And now back to the episode.
So before the break, we were talking about how much time really has passed in Rita Curran's case that, it's not been able to be solved. They haven't been able to narrow down the list of suspects. Right before we took the break, we were up to the year 2019, which is really almost current day. And they're at a point now where they have the technology and they've secured the funding to be able to test the DNA that was found on the cigarette butt at the crime scene and find out if they can get more specific to who it belongs to. So once Cece Moore had this DNA in hand, it actually only took him a few hours to finally narrow down who it belonged to. And the answer was quite a shock. It was confirmed that the person who was smoking that cigarette was none other than William DeRoos, the man who lived on the third floor of Rita's apartment building with his newlywed wife. They were both interviewed on at least 3 occasions, the first of which, as we said, was just hours after Rita was found, and they told the officers that they'd been home together all night and didn't see or hear anything strange. And then, based on those statements, William was simply ruled out as a suspect. Unfortunately, at this point, William's been dead for decades. He died in 1986 of a drug overdose while staying in a hotel in San Francisco at the age of 46. His body was cremated, so unfortunately they weren't able to get a DNA sample from him. But they did find a living half-brother that they were able to get in touch with and obtain a DNA sample from. That DNA sample was a match to the DNA profile on the cigarette butt. More evidence from Rita's case was sent to another lab in Florida where they conducted new DNA extraction techniques from DNA found on Rita's housecoat and underwear. These samples came back as being a match to the DNA that was on the cigarette butts as well. Once they confirmed that William was almost certainly their guy, they went to speak to his former wife, Melinda. She told them that she'd met William at the Zen Center in San Francisco sometime in 1970. They started dating after they found common ground in the Buddhist scene. Melinda said that William was a really great storyteller. She never met any of William's family, but she did know a little bit about them. She said that she knew William had 6 brothers and that his mom was an avid horseback rider, but she never recalled William mentioning his father. According to ancestry records, William's mother actually died at the age of 27 in 1940, and William was just born in 1939, so that means he was only an infant when his mother died.
Melinda said that William told her he'd been to prison twice in California, once for armed robbery where he served 2 to 3 years. She ended up breaking up with him while they were still living in San Francisco, but she couldn't recall the circumstances or details surrounding their breakup. But she did say it wasn't because she was afraid of him. She was never afraid of him because she said he was never physically abusive towards her. She alleged that William was a serious Buddhist, is what she said, who never drank alcohol or used drugs. When Melinda introduced William to her parents, they really weren't thrilled about this relationship. Her parents ended up moving to British Columbia a short time later, and that's when Melinda and William moved into the apartment on Brooks Avenue. Melinda said she didn't recall knowing any of the neighbors they had there. She also couldn't recall any other apartment she and William lived in together besides that one. When Melinda was shown a photo of Rita, she said that although Rita was beautiful, she didn't recognize her. According to Melinda, at the time of Rita's murder, William was working some sort of dishwashing job during the day. And William didn't want Melinda to work, so she didn't have a job at this time. Instead, he wanted her to be pregnant. And to show her, I guess, how serious he was about wanting to have a family, he actually nailed a diaphragm, like a female contraceptive, to the wall above the front door as a reminder to her.
What?
Yeah, I know. That's like, I don't think you need that reminder. I feel like if you have that conversation, you know it. That is...
And you're on the same page. Yeah, exactly.
That's aggressive.
Yes.
Melinda also said his dream was to open up a barbershop and really to have a family with her. That was his big thing. On the night of the murder, Melinda and William had a fight, but she didn't remember what it was about. She said that William left for a cool-down walk, and Melinda believes she just went to bed, but she couldn't remember how long he was gone, which I can't even imagine trying to remember these sorts of things decades before. I mean...
50 years later.
Because, like, the incident wasn't directly involving her. She didn't know Rita, which, you know, and it is this terrible thing, obviously, that happened to somebody in their building, but there's no way you thought too much about it 50 years later. You just couldn't.
And not to mention, like, Melinda was 24 or 25 at this time. So now 50 years later, I mean, she's 75. She's in her mid-70s, and, like, that would be really hard to try and recall something that happened when you were 25, whenever you are 75. I feel like it's just, I'm surprised that she could remember as much as she did, to be honest.
Same. Yeah. So any of these like gaps where she doesn't remember what they fought about, of course she doesn't, that makes perfect sense to me. She said that she did remember that he slept in the same bed with her that night, and she really didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, like wounds or scrapes. And she said he wasn't acting any differently. She said if she had noticed those things at the time, she would have quietly gone to the police. And she said she could not recall what he was wearing that night.
When they began asking her about the morning after the murder, Melinda said that she did remember the police coming to their door and saying that somebody had been badly hurt. She admitted that after the officers left that morning, William did tell her not to mention that he had left the apartment the night before. He told her he didn't want her to mention it because he already had a criminal record, and he felt that if she said to the police that he left the apartment, they would just try to pin this murder on him. So she said that while she really could not recall any follow-up interviews with the police, she did admit that she most likely would have covered for William like he asked her to do. She said that the whole idea of William committing a murder was just inconceivable to her because he really wouldn't have any reason to do that. She said she never directly asked William if he killed Rita. Melinda said she couldn't really recall even meeting any of the other tenants of that building, let alone going into their apartments. And she said, quote, "We had no relations with those people. Why would he do that? Never asked for a cup of sugar, nothing." Investigators later said that they didn't believe Melinda had any idea that William committed the murder. They said, she was young and naive and had only just been married to William for 2 weeks at that point. At some point after Rita was murdered, William moved off to Thailand. Melinda couldn't remember why she didn't go with him, even though they were married, but she does remember that she did plan to join him there in the future. After William moved, Melinda started working as a nurse, really out of, necessity. She had to have a source of income. And she finally went to Thailand to join William in March of 1972. And when she got there, she found that her husband William is now living as a monk. However, that didn't last. He was soon disrobed, and the couple then traveled around Thailand for a couple of weeks.
That's a wild thing because, we have social media today. So if your husband became a monk, I feel like it would be on social media. So the idea of, going there to see your husband, you haven't seen him however long, you can call him maybe. I don't even know. Right. I'm sure. But how would you know? And then you get there and you're like, oh, okay, you're a monk now? That's a big
what's
change.
Going on here?
Yeah.
So after they got done traveling around Thailand, William became a monk again, and Melinda became a nun. And so from that point on, their relationship was pretty much non-existent because, of course, that's against the rules of being a monk and being a nun, which I just find all of that so interesting after William's big, huge thing was wanting to have a family. And that doesn't seem like those two lives kind of conflict with each other. So it's interesting to me that like even Melinda was like, well, I'll become a nun too. And then both of us can just live that life. I just don't understand.
It was the 70s, man. Different time.
Yeah. So Melinda stayed in Thailand for about a year and a half, but William moved to a different country before she left. Before William left Thailand, he actually approached Melinda and asked her for money to finance his trip. However, he did not invite her to go along with him. So he was just like, hey, wife, not wife, can I have the money to leave this country? You're not invited.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So she refused to give him the money, and she said that's the last time she ever saw him or spoke to him. She said that she actually never even got a signature from him for a divorce, and she instead had to go through a lawyer to make everything official.
Detectives eventually learned that by 1974, William had moved back to San Francisco, where he met a 25-year-old woman that we're going to call Sherry. Investigators spoke with Sherry, and she told them that in July of that year, she lived in what was called a Zen flat, which was located 2 blocks from the Zen Center, and that she met William at the flat. She said at the time he went by the nickname Dutch, and he lived on the same floor that she did. William started to show interest in Sherry and wanted to hang out with her, and the two of them shared interest in meditation and bike riding. William did tell her about his previous marriage and his travels through Thailand, but he didn't mention what led up to him leaving Thailand. She said he never brought up his family or even said if he had any kids, and he never mentioned any specifics about living in Vermont or even mentioned that he lived there at all. Sherry and William ended up getting married in November of 1974, but it was far from being a typical situation. Sherry said they never established their relationship or if they were exclusive, and she was very insecure at that time. She said William was a guru, that was her word, and that he had power over people. And she basically described herself as a lost hippie who was just under his influence. Sherry specifically said that the hold William had on her was almost mental hypnosis, which is sort of interesting because we found out that William's father was actually a pretty well-known hypnotist in Florida. Sherry described William as being typically pretty mild-mannered, but said there were a couple of times where she did feel concerned. She mentioned a shocking incident, and when I say shocking, I mean shocking incident, where she and William had a mutual friend over to visit them at their house. And while they're talking and just having this casual conversation, William pulls out a pocket knife and, completely unprovoked, stabs their friend in the side.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I didn't know how to worry about those kind of things. Like, who would think that that could happen? That is wild.
That is so scary.
Totally. Sherry said there was no argument, there was no warning. She had no idea what caused William to just attack their friend. And so this woman goes to the hospital, and police later arrest William and take him away in a police car. Sherry said she thought that they took him to jail for the night. The next day, though, William shows up to the apartment and acts like nothing happens, which I'm also concerned how you could stab somebody in the stomach and come home the next day from jail. That's wild.
Yeah.
And William asked Sherry if he stabbed her, meaning Sherry. And she said, no, you stabbed our friend. And after hearing this, William simply went about his business, and they never talked about the incident again, nor did William seem remorseful for any of it at all.
In another incident, William strangled Sherry to the point of near unconsciousness one night when they were drinking. She said she couldn't remember what had started that fight, but she said that it was pretty common for William to just go off on these rants while Sherry sat there and tried to ignore him. She said she never really stood up for herself because she always felt insecure in the relationship. According to Sherry, William had bought himself an AR-15 sometime in 1976. She seemed to believe that he bought it in Sacramento while he was on a camping trip, and that he told her he got arrested by the feds because he bought this gun. William was gone for 5 to 7 days, and Sherry assumed that he was in jail, but of course, when he got back, they didn't ever discuss anything, so she doesn't really know the full story. Sherry said that William did smoke cigarettes, but she couldn't recall what brand they were. He also allegedly used drugs and drank heavily throughout their relationship. During their time together, the two of them traveled around California a little bit. One day in June or July of 1978, Sherry said that she had gone out for a bike ride, and when she came back, she found William in bed with another woman, and she decided right then and there that was enough. She left and never looked back. She tried to move on with her life. She started dating a new man a few months later and eventually started living with him. One day, William showed up at their house unannounced. Although he wasn't acting confrontational, Sherry did describe his behavior as being weird. He stayed for less than a day and then left again, and that was the last time Sherry ever saw him. She admitted that she was a little spooked out by William just showing up because she couldn't figure out how he even found out where she was living in the first place.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. After speaking to William's ex-wives, investigators believe for sure that William was the one who killed Rita. The theory was that he had gotten into a fight with his then-wife, Melinda, and he made his way into Rita's apartment through an unlocked door where he found Rita inside alone getting ready for bed, and he attacked her. At this time, Rita's roommates, Carrie and Paul, were still alive, and they were interviewed again to find out if either one of them knew William or Melinda, or if either of them had ever been inside their apartment. They said no, and they really didn't even have a recollection of William and Melinda. They definitely had never invited them into the apartment that Rita shared with her roommates.
Finally, on February 21st of 2023, so just a few months ago, nearly 52 years after Rita was murdered, Burlington police held a press conference where they formally announced that they were confident that William DeRoos was responsible for her death. They said that, unfortunately, since William died in a hotel room after an overdose, he wouldn't be held accountable for this crime, but that the case was to be closed. The police chief said that the day was, quote, filled with mixed emotions, end quote. He said, quote, ultimately, those emotions are ones of relief, of pride for me and for this department, but mostly of gratitude to a family that has been through an incredible ordeal for more than half a century, end quote. Cece Moore, who again was the genealogist who first identified William's DNA, also spoke at the conference, stating, quote, even though he's dead and there won't be justice, it is a really positive outcome. And it's a great illustration of how investigative genetic genealogy is resolving these cases that so many people have cared about for so many years, end quote. William's DNA remains in the national database, but has not come up as a match on any other murders, which quite frankly, I am surprised about after hearing all of this. Sadly, Rita's parents passed away before they ever found out what happened to her. Rita's brother and sister are both still alive, and they actually attended the conference. Rita's sister Mary told WCAX that her family always wondered who killed Rita. She said, quote, the years rolled into decades, and even though we might not ever give up hope, we really felt at this point the person was probably dead. We'd never know who did it, end quote. After finding out who killed Rita, Mary also said, quote, we were numb, 51 and a half years, and it's the guy upstairs, end quote.
Wow. I'm so thankful that they were able to solve the case once and for all and get answers. It is unfortunate that some of her family wasn't around to be able to see that, to see that happen. And it's also unfortunate that he passed away and didn't have to answer for any of it.
Right.
But it is fascinating that they knew enough 50 years ago to save certain pieces of evidence. It's like to me, I always get hung up on that. I'm like, it's wild to me that they knew to save that, that they're like, one day we might be able to use this for something, even though right now we don't have the technology we need. One day we might. But that, to me, that's just so amazing that they do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because this case would have nothing if it didn't have the DNA. It would never be solved unless there was a deathbed confession, which he died almost 30 years ago. You weren't going to get it. So, man, this is a wild one and says so much for genetic genealogy. And I don't know. We just see more and more of these stories, right? More and more things are being solved because of it. And I'm so glad. I can't imagine being somebody who's like, probably waiting around to be arrested because you screwed up, not obviously murdered somebody, but screwed up, maybe left evidence, maybe left your DNA, and now you're just waiting for it to come through. So enjoy waiting.
Yeah, I know. I think about that all the time too, about people who are guilty of crimes or who have done something, how they must just have that on their mind constantly.
I hope
about
so.
Like the fact that there's a high chance you can be caught now, like even though it's been so many years.
Yeah, good.
All right, guys. So are you ready to turn the page, Melissa? Are you ready to move on to the last thing before we go?
I would love to.
Okay, so this week we're going to play a little game, a new one that we've actually never played. I found it on a BuzzFeed article about games that you can play if you're taking a road trip. And I figured we're not taking a road trip, but this is kind of like a trip.
We're taking people on a journey, whether they want to or not.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to play that little game. We'll explain that in a second. But then there was also a lot of you who asked us about how come we didn't recap the reunion of Love is Blind. And the reason we didn't was because we had intended to do like a live interactive session during the episode. But that didn't happen because, as you know, if you are a Love is Blind fan, the reunion did not go off as planned live on Netflix. They had a little bit of a...
It was like the Fire Festival of live events. It was really bad.
So we didn't actually watch the reunion live with you guys like we had planned on. And me and Melissa watched it, in the coming days after it was finally released for everybody to see. So after you're done listening, we're going to talk about we'll talk about the reunion a little bit. We'll put that on Patreon. So if you are on Patreon, look for that and we'll kind of close the Love is Blind chapter.
Until the next one, which will be really soon because apparently they're doing them all the time now.
Yes. All right. So for this game, Melissa, did you understand the instructions? They were pretty quick.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so the game is basically we're making a fortunate situation out of an unfortunate one, or making an unfortunate one out of a fortunate one, I guess. Perfect. We can do it in reverse. So the rules basically are that one person starts by saying, fortunately, like something, good has happened, and the next person just has to follow it up with saying something unfortunate, but it has to go along with what the other person just said.
Right.
So like they gave the example in this one. So one of us would say, fortunately, this will be my first time seeing the Grand Canyon. And then the other one would respond, unfortunately, it was invaded by Martians just last week. And then the next person would go back and say, but fortunately, and I got to come up with something that goes with that. But we go back and forth. So we'll see how long we can do this before one of us gets completely tripped up. I'll be tripped up immediately. But
pretty quickly.
I feel like you're going to be good at this. You're good at things like this.
I'm good at random games that people play from BuzzFeed articles. Great. Okay.
You're good at being quick and witty. That's what I meant.
I'll take it. I was trying to milk that out of you. Thank you. All right. Do you want to start it or do you want me to start?
I don't. I would like you to start because I don't have any great ideas.
Okay. I don't really have a great idea, but let's go with this one. Fortunately, during our recording today, it didn't rain.
But unfortunately, it's like 85 degrees outside.
Fortunately, I'm wearing short sleeves today, and the weather won't bother me.
Unfortunately for you, I think it is going to storm later this afternoon.
Fortunately for me, I always have at least one umbrella in my car.
Unfortunately, it's broken.
Fortunately, I can go to the store. It's just down the road and get a new one.
Unfortunately, the store that you have to go to is Walmart.
Fortunately, Walmart takes debit cards and not Apple Pay for some reason. I just needed to get that dig in. I'm so mad that they don't.
Unfortunately, it's a lot easier to get your credit card information stolen off of a debit card than it is off of using Apple Pay.
Sounds like that may have happened to you recently, Mandy.
It absolutely did.
Fortunately, I just found a $20 bill in my purse. I'm paying in cash. I could do this all day, baby.
Unfortunately, the cashier doesn't know how to give you proper change back.
Fortunately, I'm a very generous person, and I said, keep the change.
Unfortunately, they're super ungrateful, and they told you that it wasn't enough, and they wanted to keep more.
Fortunately, I bit my tongue, and I walked out of that store with my umbrella. I like that. That was fun.
Unfortunately, you got hit by a bus when you walked outside, so now we can't play this game anymore.
Fortunately, that reminded me of my favorite movie, Mean Girls, which was playing in the hospital the whole time I was recovering.
Are you calling me a mean girl?
No, the movie Mean Girls. Remember at the end where she gets hit by the bus?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
I feel like I've lost the plot now.
Yeah, I think we lost it pretty early on. Okay, do you want to be fortunately and I'll be unfortunately?
Okay. Fortunately, I get to go visit my family this weekend.
Unfortunately, you get to visit your family this weekend.
Fortunately, I get to fly by myself. So that's kind of like getting some peace and quiet.
Unfortunately, you're flying Southwest Airlines. You have no idea when you'll get there.
Fortunately, though, I paid extra so I could pick my own seat instead of doing the bum rush at the gate.
Unfortunately, when you get to the gate, they're going to tell you they don't have your flight booked.
Oh, I feel like I'm giving myself. Are we actually giving me bad luck for my flight?
No.
But fortunately, they found my confirmation, and I'm off on my trip.
Unfortunately, when you land, you realize you left your jacket in Florida.
Fortunately, I met a really, really tall, dark, and handsome man who offered to give me his jacket at the airport, so I didn't have to be cold for my entire trip.
Unfortunately, I told your husband, and he got really angry. Whoops.
Fortunately, he's also a very nice man who doesn't stay mad for long.
Unfortunately, he did Instagram Live the entire conversation. And so now your kids are saying, who's my new dad?
Who's my new dad? Would it be who's my new mom?
Oh, no. Well, he's saying, like, you're talking about getting this jacket from this guy. And they're like, oh, no, is that my new dad? My mom ran off. And now I have a new dad. Come on, Mandy. Think dark. I'm thinking dark.
I know. I just feel like I'm giving myself all this bad luck. I'm like, wow, now I'm going to have a missed flight. I'm going to have a fight with my husband. Like,
but you will meet a tall, dark, and handsome man.
And have a free jacket.
You should have said, fortunately, it's Versace, and I'm going to sell it for $1 million.
Oh, that would have been even better. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
That was fun. I enjoyed that. That was ridiculous. Perfect.
I know. I think our mistake was not planning what we were going to start off these with. So next time we play this, we should have a good fortunately thing to start with. I think we kind of
we got right into the weather right away.
We did. Yeah, of course. Why is that always our default?
It really is. Well, that was fun though.
Yes, very fun. All right, Melissa, I think that's it for this week.
That's plenty. We've done enough damage.
All right, guys, we'll be back next week. Same time, same place, new story.
Have a great week.
Bye.